Good evening and welcome to 3 Minutes with Mike. Last week we discussed about the prophetic pileup that seems to be taking place in our world today. It's as if we're living through end time prophecies in the very moment. One of the prophecies is the Abraham Accord that was signed between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. And the Abraham Accord is not only historic, it's actually biblical in proportion. Now, names and words always mean something. They are significant. And the Abraham of the Abraham Accord had two sons, one named Ishmael, born to Hagar, and Isaac, he was born to Sarah. Now, there was a clear tension between those two, and the Bible teaches us that both Isaac and Ishmael claimed the right to be the firstborn, with both of them having a legitimate claim to being Abraham's firstborn through their respective mothers. Ishmael through Hagar, and Isaac through Sarah. The Jewish Midrash, you might be saying, the Jewish Midrash sounds like something that needs an ointment. Well, the Midrash is a Jewish interpretation of the Scriptures. Vanessa Lovelace defines the Midrash as a Jewish mode of interpretation that not only engages the words of the text, behind the text, beyond the text, but also focuses on each letter and the words left unsaid by each line. So the Midrash explains that when God told Abraham to take his son, Abraham asked God, which one, Ishmael or Isaac? God responded, you're only one. Once again, Abraham asked for clarification, since both sons were the only son to their respective mothers. Then God said, the one whom you love. Now, this would help Abraham understand who God was referring to, and he told God, God, I love both of them. And that led God to say, hey, it's Isaac outright. Believe it or not, Abraham did not favor one son over the other. Now, the very fact that Abraham loved both of his sons can be clearly seen by the Midrashic interpretation of God's command that Abraham offer his son as a sacrifice. The verse is found in the book of Genesis, chapter 22, verse 2 to be in fact. It relates how God told Abraham, please take your son, your only one, whom you love, Isaac. We kind of forget about Ishmael in Abraham's story, but Abraham didn't, nor did God. Abraham loved Ishmael, his actual firstborn. And that love is clearly seen in two verses in the Old Testament. The first occurs when God promises Abraham that he is going to have a son through his wife Sarah, who will be the recipient of a blessing, including all the land of Israel, the Holy Land. And Abraham replies, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. Genesis chapter 17, verse 18. You see, Abraham has a clear concern for the role that Ishmael and his descendants would have, and God immediately confronts Abraham, saying, I have blessed him, and I'll even make Ishmael into a great nation. See, Abraham was very concerned about Ishmael, and we see that in that instance. The second instance occurs when Sarah wants to expel Ishmael from their home due to this interpersonal conflict that was going on between Ishmael and his half-brother Isaac. Now, of course, Miss Sarah is going to always take Isaac's side because that is her son. Now, the Bible says very clearly in Genesis chapter 21, verse 11, that the matter greatly distressed Abraham. And blended families can cause some distress, and blended families can cause some turmoil, and that's exactly what Abraham was feeling. And he didn't want to part with Ishmael. He didn't want Ishmael to leave the house. He only agrees to do so after God had instructed him to go ahead and listen to Sarah. But God consoles him with the promise that he will take Ishmael into a nation, for he is your offspring. God promises Abraham that Ishmael will also have his own nation. And despite the fact that Ishmael is expelled from the home, Jewish tradition teaches that as long as Ishmael and his descendants practice the ritual of circumcision, they will control the land of Israel for 1,300 years. Now, to me, that is quite remarkable that from about the 7th century AD to the 20th century AD, that the Holy Lands was ruled by Muslims, 1,300 years. Now, despite the rift going on between these two brothers, Ishmael and Isaac, the Bible makes it clear that this feud will not last forever. When Abraham passes away, the Bible tells us that his two sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. That's in Genesis chapter 25, verse 9. Now, the rabbinical teaching tells us that Ishmael joined Isaac for the burial of their daddy. Now, Ishmael is mentioned after Isaac, although Ishmael was the firstborn. Ishmael is mentioned after Isaac in the text, indicating that somewhere along the line, Ishmael had repented and accepted the fact that Isaac had the right to inherit the land. He had accepted the fact that Isaac was the promised one and the land belonged to him. Now, this is according to the ancient Jewish writings, is the meaning behind the words, Abraham was old, well in years, and the Lord blessed Abraham with all. You see, Abraham loved both of his sons. Abraham loved Ishmael, and he was pained to have him at such a distance. And he also loved Isaac, the blessing that God had given him. You know, as an older man myself, when my sons get along together, it is a good day in the house. Abraham leaves this world with his two sons getting along, Ishmael and Isaac. Tradition teaches us that this is why the Bible says that Abraham died at a good old age, because he was at peace with the fact that his two sons were reconciled. Their differences had long been forgotten, and now they're getting along. There's a better understanding between Isaac and Ishmael, and that Isaac would inherit the land. Jewish tradition teaches us that what happens to the forefathers is a sign of that what will transpire in their descendants. It goes as far as saying everything that happens to the fathers happens to the sons. And not one thing that occurred with the fathers won't occur with their descendants. If that's the case, then the reconciliation of Isaac and Ishmael, with Ishmael accepting Isaac's presence in the land of Israel, you see, it wasn't simply a story of the past about Ishmael, Isaac, and Abraham, but it was actually a foretelling what would happen in the future. And that foretelling took place last week. You see, the agreements that were signed in Washington serve as another step in the process of reconciliation between Isaac and his two sons, between the descendants of Isaac and the descendants of Ishmael. You see, Abraham's two sons have had a healing of wounds, and that brought happiness to the father. And what happened to the father in the past will happen to the father and the sons today in future generations. Y'all, the Abrahamic Accords was the perfect title for the event that happened last week, which proves that the developments that we are experiencing with the establishment, development, and success of the state of Israel, y'all, they're not only historic, they are also fulfillments of biblical prophecies. Thank you for joining me on tonight's episode of 3 Minutes with Pastor Mike, 3-ish minutes with Pastor Mike. I really wish that you consider supporting this ministry financially and also with your prayers. You can give financially by checking us out at chesterfbc.org. You can give online right there, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year from anywhere in the world. We also want to invite you to come and join us with in-person worship this weekend. We have a Saturday night service at 5 o'clock at 719 State Street. We're located right next to the Chester Public Library, and we would love to have you at that service at 5 o'clock. It's an outdoor service. You pull in. You can either sit in your car, turn your radio to 92.1, or you can get out in your lawn chair by your car, and you can enjoy the service outside. It's a really good service. In the event of rain, we'll go inside and we'll have service on Saturday night at 5. But we also have a Sunday morning service, an in-person worship experience at 10:30 on Sunday morning, and we would love to have you there. We do have guidelines in effect. Masks are encouraged; they're not required. We will practice social distancing, and we've been having church in person since June. So we've got a fairly good system to keep everybody safe. We would love for you to come down and join us this weekend. Hey, we love you. God bless you. My name is Pastor Mike, and I'll be praying for you. Thank you so much for tuning in to 3 Minutes with Mike, your prophetic download for the week.